This is the Literary Atlanta podcast. I'm your host, Allison Law. We have reached that point in the year where we are about 2 weeks away from the AJC Decatur Book Festival, one of the largest independent book festivals in the country. And on Tuesday, August the 14th, tickets for both the keynote and kidnote presentations went on sale. And here's the information that you need to know about both of these events that take place on Friday, August the 31st of the festival. First of all, I'll deal with the kidnote. Kidnote this year celebrates the 20th anniversary of the U.S. publication of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The kidnote takes place at Presser Hall at Agnes Scott College on Friday, August 31st at 5 p.m. and features local authors Becky Albertalli, Laurel Snyder, and Nick Stone. Now, tickets for the kidnote, you can get 4 tickets per person, and the tickets are available if you go to Karis Books and More, Eagle Eye Books, and Little Shop of Stories. Online ticket sales start Thursday, August 16th at noon. And that's going to be an Eventbrite website, dbfkidnote2018.eventbrite.com. So there are 2 ways to get tickets to both the keynote and the kidnote. You can go online or you can visit one of our local indie bookstores, Karis Books and More, Eagle Eye Books, and Little Shop of Stories. The keynote this year features internationally acclaimed director and actor of stage, film, and television, Kenny Leon. And the kidnote takes place at Agnes Scott College. The keynote takes place Friday evening at the Emory Schwartz Center for the Performing Arts. So again, 2 ways for you to get tickets to the keynote featuring Kenny Leon. You can go online to tickets.arts.emory.edu, or you can go in person and pick up tickets at Karis Books and More, Eagle Eye Books, Tall Tale Books, and Little Shop of Stories. There is a limit of 2 tickets per person for the keynote featuring Kenny Leon. All of this information, I just read it right off the AJC Decatur Book Festival website, which is decaturbookfestival.com. And we will include links to all of this information in the show notes and on our website at literaryatlanta.com. Before we get to the Decatur Book Festival, though, we have a couple of big events happening this week at the Georgia Center for the Book at the Decatur Library. One of them is tonight featuring Delia Owens. She's an internationally best-selling author of nonfiction who's debuting her first novel. My conversation with Delia Owens about her novel, Where the Crawdads Sing, is up next on episode 45 of Literary Atlanta. Atlanta is a book town, home to avid readers and host to some of the finest writers and storytellers on the planet. That's my thesis statement, and this podcast provides the supporting details through behind-the-scenes anecdotes, author interviews, and all of the ways that you can experience the rich literary landscape right here in Literary Atlanta. Delia Owens is the co-author of 3 internationally best-selling nonfiction books about her life as a wildlife scientist in Africa, including Cry of the Kalahari and Secrets of the Savannah. She's won the John Burroughs Medal for nature writing and has been published in Nature, the African Journal of Ecology, and International Wildlife, among many others. She currently lives in Idaho, and Where the Crawdads Sing is set in North Carolina. This is her first novel. I asked her how all of her travels brought her to the marsh of North Carolina. You're a native of Thomasville, Georgia, and you spent more than 20 years studying wildlife in Africa. And now you're living in the mountains of Idaho. So why did you choose coastal North Carolina as the setting for Where the Crawdads Sing?
Okay, great question. I guess I went all the way around the world to get, but for several reasons. I chose the wild coastal marsh of North Carolina for practical reasons and for poetic reasons. This story is about a young girl who survives largely on her own for many years as a young girl, and it was important to me that the story was believable. I didn't want it to be fanciful. And in the marsh, there is plenty to eat that you can collect, even as a child. You can collect oysters and mussels and fish. You could fish. It's a warm, temperate climate. There was firewood available for cooking. So it is realistic that a young girl could actually live there for many years.
Yes.
So that was the practical reason. Also, it's for the poetic reason. I love to write about nature. I wanted a wild setting that was beautiful, and there's a lot of symbolism. There's the marsh there and the swamp. The marsh areas represented the space of light and color where beautiful family events take place. The swamp represented more of a place where maybe less desirable behaviors would happen. Also, a lot of the clues, this story is a mystery, and a lot of the clues to the mystery actually painted into the backdrop of the marsh. And I shouldn't say any more than that, but they're there.
Okay, so you have the coming-of-age story of Kaya, whom when we first meet her, is 6 years old. And then you have the alternating timeline and the mystery behind the two boys who discover the body of Chase Andrews, who's this high school quarterback and hometown hero. Was there one story that came into your head first?
I think of it really as the same story because it involves the same characters. It's a flashback and flash forward in time. And I realized I first wrote the story in a chronological order. And then I realized there was a lot of childhood going on, sort of for a third of the book as Kaya was growing up in the marsh and surviving on her own. The mystery was coming later, so I thought I'll flash forward and put some of the components of the mystery in the beginning. That way, it's sort of like foreshadowing. It's telling the reader, okay, here's this little girl growing up in the marsh, but also there's this other slightly darker but mysterious event that has happened near her, and the reader starts wondering, well, how are these two stories going to connect? Mm-hmm. So that was my reasoning for doing those two different storylines.
And you start to connect the two stories by dropping some little clues, like the one day that Kaya goes to public school, she encounters Chase Andrews. So they're contemporaries. Yes.
He's a few years older, but they're contemporaries. And of course, she didn't go to school. She was a wild child in the marsh, but she was able to identify some of the people from the village because she did go there to buy her little groceries like grits and things. So she knew some of the people. And yes, the stories of Chase, Andrew, and Kaya are connected early. And then as their lives move forward and in different directions, you start realizing, oh dear, there is going to be a connection here, and some of it seems very positive, and some of it seems a little bit scary, and that's how the story moves forward. I wanted to write a book that was a fast-paced mystery. I mean, a compelling, I don't know if fast-paced. I wanted to write a very compelling mystery. I wanted people to have a real reason to turn the page. And yet I wanted the writing to be poetic and have a lush, beautiful background. So I wanted people to be sort of almost torn between reading fast to see what's going to happen and yet also wanting to savor the words. I wanted to do that. That was my objective.
As we mentioned earlier, she's 6 years old in the beginning of the book, and it starts with her watching her mother walk away. And soon after, her siblings follow, and then eventually her father also follows. So she's really by herself living out in the marsh. But I love what you write about her as she's growing older. Like in the beginning, her imagination is what keeps her company. And then as she grows older, the imagination becomes flat. Can you talk about how Kaya first appeared in your imagination?
As soon as I put Kaya on the page, she took off on her own. She just grew. She was so real to me. I mean, she just honestly wrote her part herself. She was alone, but she was spunky, and she had character. She had humor. It's understandable that she was afraid and had to learn on her own how to survive. But she did it with with grace and abilities that we start admiring her, and we feel sorry for her. But really, she did such a good job of taking care of herself, and she learned about the marsh. She became a naturalist, and she learned how to outwit the truant officers by watching how other animals escaped. She learned about covering her tracks. She learned about how to collect mussels by watching the ravens. So she did have all this imagination because she was young and figuring things out. But then she reaches a stage where she is truly lonely, and especially when she approaches adolescence. She reaches that point that she wants to be with others, that she wants to be loved. And that's when you can see her getting slightly depressed. She always was very good about collecting firewood on time and collecting all her bird nests and feathers that she loved to collect from nature. And she starts, sort of slowing down on that, and she loses interest in things. I think that's so common for all of us. When we're busy on a project and we have something in mind, we can go for it and do it. But when we reach the point where we're lonely, we become depressed and we do not perform as well as we did before.
The other thing is, because Kaya cannot read, she makes up her own language and assigns her own names to the animals and the insects and the fish and the things that she encounters in the marsh. It seems like she has a lot in common with you, since you spent so much time out in nature and writing about what you observed. It's almost like we're able to observe her as a naturalist.
Well, and a lot of that is true. And I had a great family and great friends, but other than that, I did have a life like Kaya. I spent all of my youth out in the wilds, going into the woods. My mother encouraged me, and she was the one who said, go as far in the woods as you can go way out yonder where the crawdads sing. And I did. My friends and I, whether we were exploring on foot or on horseback, and a lot of times by myself, I walked in the woods and I collected things, and I observed feathers. I observed how different birds made their nests, different than other birds. All of that was fascinating to me. And that was my childhood, but then it became my profession, because then I was so intrigued by all that I went on to study zoology, to get my higher degrees, and go to Africa and study wildlife. So, yes, there's a lot of Kaya in me. There's a lot of me in Kaya.
I'm most interested to know how you came up with the dialect that you use for all of the dialogue. Is that specific to something that you have heard how other people speak to each other, or is that a part of your North Carolina research?
Oh, I grew up in South Georgia. Mm-hmm. I knew all those expressions. That's how we spoke in South Georgia. That a lot of the language is a Southern accent, is what it is. I mean, and Southern accent, it sounds crazy to say so. I mean, it is crazy to say that someone has a Southern accent. There are many Southern accents. The ones in South Georgia are different from the ones in North Georgia, and different from the ones in South Carolina and North Carolina. But I grew up with people speaking like that all around me. And I said some of those expressions. I said yeller instead of yellow. Mm-hmm. And what happened to me was my parents moved from South Georgia to Florida when I was going into the 11th grade. I thought the way I spoke was the way everybody spoke. But when I went down to Florida, the kids at high school laughed at me. They laughed at the way I talked. They would get me to read this so we can hear you talk. They wanted to hear that Southern accent. And because they laughed at me, I became very self-conscious of the Southern accent, and I started sort of analyzing it and studying it. And I would work really hard on, when I pronounced a word, window, I would be sure and say window and not winder. Mm-hmm. And because of that, throughout my life, I feel like I have more of a sense of exactly how the words are spelled and spoken than maybe some people do. I don't claim to be an expert on it at all, but I am very aware of it. And when I started to write it, it just became natural. Now, I did do some research. I did read other authors who have, like Toni Morrison, who have used a Southern accent, And I was very careful to check and make sure I wasn't doing anything terribly wrong. And I'm sure the accent I have introduced is probably more South Georgia than it is North Carolina. But I think people will give me a pass on that.
Well, that's the beauty of writing your first novel, right? You can.
That's the beauty of writing any novel. It's like, this is fiction, which is very different because, my first 3 books were nonfiction, and you have to get everything right. You have to get the timelines. Of course, they had a lot of natural history from my scientific research in those first 3 books, so everything had to be right. But fiction is so free.
So you felt very empowered writing fiction. Did you always know that you wanted to, or did you always have a desire to write a novel?
I have had this desire to write this novel for many years. It's a story that I became fascinated with when I was in Africa. I was very isolated in Africa. I lived in remote camps, and I became fascinated in how isolation can change you and affect you. And I wanted to write a novel that explored how a young person growing up on their own would be affected by isolation. Mm-hmm. I studied the socialization of mammals in Africa, the pride of lions, the clan of brown hyenas, the herd of elephants. I studied their social groups. And we, as primates, have a very strong propensity to live in social groups. And when you're isolated from your group, it has major effects on you. And what I think is interesting is, even though I was in the middle of Africa in very remote areas, when I came back to this country and interacted with my old friends, my troop that I'd left behind, I realized that people that live in the middle of a city, they're also very lonely. They're also very isolated.
Why do you think that is, or what's your explanation for why that is?
I think when you live in a small town like I grew up in, it was natural to have these small groups because you knew your high school friends all the way through your life. There was my mother was in a sewing group. My father was in a golfing group. We had groups. In cities now, people are busy with their jobs. They all day long working, driving in traffic, getting home, feeding the kids. There's not as much time for these social groups. They've lost contact with their truth. Mm-hmm. And you can see that now not everybody's like that. Of course, there's some people who are very social, but I see that a lot of people don't have a special group. They may have a few friends they see now and then, but it's not the same thing.
Right. Well, you dedicated this book to your troop.
I did.
And you shared a special toast. Can you share the meaning, or what is the significance of the toast?
This toast. All right, these are 3 of my best friends in the world, and we grew up together since 2nd grade. 2 of them are twins. Margaret and Amanda are twins, and Barbara and I were these great friends. And we were, years ago, in Boston, Georgia, where the twins' grandmother lived. Her name was Danny. And Danny taught us this toast. And it says, "Here's told ya, if I never seed ya, I never knowed ya." And of course we gave no thought to what it meant, but we would toast Coca-Cola in little shot glasses 10 or 15 times. "Here's told ya, if I never seed ya, I never knowed you." To this day, every time we see each other at the airport. We run out and meet at the Shack. We have a place in South Georgia called the Shack where we go and visit and stay together as girlfriends. And we say, "Here's told you, if I never seed you, I never knowed you." And over the years, we begin to realize that although it sounds nonsensical, it has a lot of meaning. We do know each other. We do love each other. And we've had this group forever. And how much does that mean to me? And I wish everybody could have that group.
Are they going to be in Thomasville when you go down to visit on book tour?
They're going to be in Thomasville, and they're going to be in Atlanta. They wanted to follow me to North Carolina, and I said, no. Yes, they're going to be there.
That's amazing, though, that you've had those friends and you've been able to get together and stay in touch with each other since 2nd grade.
Yes, and that is the point of my book. What happens to people when they have none of that?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if you grow up alone with no family and no girlfriends? How do you behave? And it's a very serious matter.
Well, in addition to your girlfriends, your childhood girlfriends, do you have a writing troupe? Do you have a writers group or people that are in your community who help you with your writing?
No, I don't. Not at all. Writing to me is a very solitary sport. Mm-hmm. And I know that's not true for some people, but I've never had any writing lessons. I've never taken a class in writing. It's just something that comes from in me, and it's something I do on my own. I get up at 4:30 in the morning and sit at my computer, which is almost like a campfire to me, the light in the dark room, and that's where I write. And yeah, it's solitary.
And how do you feel about the business of now going on book tour and promoting the book and talking to people about the book?
It's very exciting, and I'm so thrilled. I'm so honored to be sit on a book tour because, not every author gets it, so I'm thrilled. It's a bit nerve-wracking to me. I'm not used to being in cities. I've traveled a lot, so I can do it, but it's standing up in front of a group talking is a little bit scary to me. I'll put it to you this way. The publisher set up a meeting with me with some press in New York, and I stood up at this luncheon and had to talk to these very sophisticated journalists, and I said to them, I've been charged by elephants, seriously, in my camp several times. I've been charged by wild lions more than several times, and the feeling I get right now standing in front of you is about the same level of excitement that I feel with an angry lion coming toward me. So I'm not real comfortable with it, but it's a great opportunity.
I agree. And what are you working on now?
Well, I've started my next novel, and again, it's going to be a sort of a mysterious story based on a very strong ecosystem. I mean, the settings that I choose, habitats that I choose are much more than backdrop. They're almost a character themselves. My life story has been in these places. And so this book will be based in the dense forest of North Florida, and the natural caves and springs that occur there leave a lot of room for some mishaps.
Mm-hmm. In addition to the mystery and the beautiful descriptions of landscapes found in Where the Crawdads Sing, Delia wanted me to mention that there's also a love story between the person she considers the unevolved and another man who is the evolved male, and they're both vying for Kaya's affection, and at different times in the story, they're successful in capturing her attention. So there's also a love story. If you want to know more about this love story and maybe meet some members of Delia's troupe, you should head out to the Decatur Library on Wednesday, August the 15th. Beginning at 7:15 p.m., Delia Owens will be talking about her new novel, and afterwards she will be signing copies of the book. This event is free and open to the public. The following night, in the same location at the Decatur Library Auditorium, the Georgia Center for the Book will recognize the 2018 Books All Georgians Should Read at a special award ceremony. This is the 9th time the Georgia Center for the Book has selected the works of prize-winning authors and illustrators with Georgia connections. Speaking of Georgia connections, this weekend Foxtail Bookshop has 2 wonderful local author events. First, on Saturday, August the 18th, beginning at 2 p.m., they have a double header with contemporary fiction authors M.J. Pullen and Ricky Schultz. And then on Sunday, they have a ticketed event at the Elm Street Cultural Arts Center featuring thriller writer, the master of suspense and procedurals and all of the scary things that go bump in the night, local author Karen Slaughter. Again, that's a ticketed event. You will need to go online and get all of the details at Foxtail Bookshop. Remember, when you can, support these local booksellers and the authors they're hosting by buying a copy of the book at the event. Thanks for listening to this episode. As always, you can find links to the people, books, and events mentioned in the podcast on our website at literaryatlanta.com. You can listen to episodes there or download them wherever you like to get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, or TuneIn. I'm Allison Law, your host. Until next time, take care and stay lit curious.